Welcome to Zero Knowledge. I'm your host, Anna Rose. In this podcast, we will be exploring the latest in zero-knowledge research and the decentralized web, as well as new paradigms that promise to change the way we interact and transact online. This week, I speak with Alex Pruden and Conor Deegan from Project 11. We return to the topic of quantum computers and the threat they pose to cryptographic systems across the board, and specifically to many of the major blockchains we use today. We go over the quantum threat in detail, look at the different algorithms within the blockchain stack, and identify which ones are most at risk in the near future. We discuss why simply upgrading a network doesn't solve the quantum problem, and walk through what address owners would actually have to do to protect their funds. We also get into the mitigation strategies, including what Project 11 is proposing and how different chains are approaching this challenge. Quick disclosure, I'm a small investor in Project 11, but the project has evolved since I first invested, so it's great to hear about their progress and get an update directly from the team. Now, before we kick off, I just want to share that we've launched Season 3 of the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. The ZK Whiteboard Sessions are produced by ZK Hack in collaboration with Bain Capital Crypto. This series goes deep on some of the key concepts in ZK. I've added a link in the show notes. Be sure to check out these videos. They are a great way to learn about the fundamentals and techniques powering the ZK systems we often discuss on this show. Also, if you're looking to jump into ZK professionally, or just looking for a new role, I wanted to point you towards the ZK Jobs Board. There you can find job postings from top teams working in ZK. And if you're a team looking to hire, you can also post your job there today. We've heard great things from teams who found their perfect hire through this platform, and we hope it can help you as well. Find out more over at jobsboard.zereknowledge.fm. You can find this on our website, and I've added it to the show notes. Now here is my interview with Alex and Conor from Project 11. Today, I'm here with Alex Pruden and Conor Deegan from Project 11. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Awesome. It's great to be here again.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here.
Cool. So this episode, I feel like, is going to be revisiting a topic that we were talking about earlier this year, quantum computing, quantum engineering. We did 2 episodes on the show back in, I think it was like April, May. We did quantum engineering with Yelena Vukovic, where we really dug into quantum computers, like what they are. And then we did an episode on quantum punks with Alex and Nicola, where we talked about how quantum computing and cryptography were overlapping. So I'm going to obviously add those 2 links to the show notes. But I want to highlight one other episode, which was like an older one. Like back in 2023, we had Or Satath on the show. And in that, he talked about like quantum computers potentially breaking Bitcoin and the tests you'd have to do to figure out if it's been broken. And I feel like it's really important to highlight that episode series because what I know of Project 11 is this is the problem space that you guys are tackling. So yeah, I'm going to add all of these links in the show notes. I know we're going to dive into it, but I wanted to give a bit of context to our listeners. Cool. So before we jump into Project 11, I also want to catch up with both of you. Alex, you're like part of the ZK podcast crew at this point. You've been on the show a number of times. You've hosted study clubs. You've hosted stages at ZK Summit. I feel like most people in our community know you, but there's been some changes in your world in the last year and a half, or since you've been on the show. So why don't we hear from you? What's been happening? And also, tell us about the move to Project 11.
Yeah, great. So, people were like, hey, I thought this guy was at Aleo. Yeah, which I was. And actually, I'm still quite involved. And I'll talk about that. But just for context, for those folks who may not know me, I'll just briefly give my background. I was a U.S. Army officer. I got interested in crypto and blockchain overseas for humanitarian use cases. Ultimately, and I started my career in crypto after grad school as an investor. And then I ended up at Aleo. But in particular, after I left the Army, I became really interested in cryptography. That's the common thread between Aleo and Project 11. So both are really at the cutting edge of cryptography, right? So Aleo was all about zero knowledge cryptography, which is, of course, this is the Zero Knowledge podcast. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that concept. But, Project 11, we're focused on, we call it future-proofing, future building, using post-quantum cryptography to future-proof digital asset networks and build the quantum rails or the post-quantum financial rails of the future. So for me, this is quite a related problem space, and there's a lot of similarities. And in fact, we work with a lot of people, and we'll probably get into this on the show, that have a foot in both worlds.
Nice.
But so maybe just quickly on the transition from Aleo, I was the first employee at Aleo. I ultimately became the CEO, but I was not one of the founders. And Howard Wu, who's been on the show a number of times, I guess we call Ellie the godfather of ZK now. I saw that on X, but Howard is maybe the great uncle of ZK then, if we're going with that framing. In any event, Howard's at the helm again at Aleo, and I think he's doing a great job. I am the president of the board of the Aleo Network Foundation, and I'm happy to continue to support the team in that role. So yeah, but now I'm over here at Project 11 as the founding CEO and with Conor, and we've been having a lot of fun tackling all the post-quantum stuff.
Cool. And you're still in the ZK community, even if you're not doing as much ZK these days, right?
Sure. That's right.
I think people also know you from the ZK podcast Telegram group and your spicy opinions on Twitter. So I'll leave folks to find those. All right, Conor, let's hear from you. This is the first time that you're on the show. Share with us a little bit about your background and what led to the founding of Project 11.
I'm from Dublin, so born and bred Irish. I'm a cryptographer, so I wouldn't, I like to mention that for me, definitely crypto equals cryptography, I would say. So I've been a cryptographer for the last few years, mostly on the applied side, focused on the protocol layer. Spent the last 7 years trying to figure out decentralized identity, which turns out is really difficult in the Ethereum world. So I was doing that before Project 11 and getting stuck into all things DIDs and, plenty to talk about there. And then about nearly a year ago, decided to go all in on this post-quantum thing. This quantum threat's been growing, and I'm sure we'll drift into that shortly. And decided now seems like the right time to go and take all that cryptography knowledge and point it directly at this post-quantum threat, study these new algorithms and get stuck in. So I'm the VP of Engineering and co-founder at Project 11, and I spend most of my day figuring out these post-quantum algorithms and how we're going to deploy them to the real world.
Nice. When you were sort of initially founding Project 11, though, was the focus blockchain use cases, or because quantum computers and the threats that they pose, it's so much wider than that. I mean, it's like all encryption. It's like every bank security system. Like there's such a wide space of attack potentially from a malicious actor with a quantum computer. So you were studying quantum computing, but were you already focused on this use case?
Yeah, I think you're right. So, this problem isn't defined for just blockchains. This, as you rightly say, this is everything. Everywhere we use these quantum vulnerable schemes, they need to change. They need to migrate. They need to figure this out. They need to deploy these new schemes. Initially, when we started Project 11, we actually were heavily focused on blockchain specifically. And then, like all things, we drifted away and thought maybe let's look at other fields, and then kind of, which in a nice way came right back to where we all started and are still focusing on these blockchains. For us, I think blockchains have this unique vulnerability. They're very different to all of those systems you've just listed. You take, something as simple as a browser. And one day you'll open that up, you'll be post-quantum secure. You'll do nothing, you'll close your laptop one night, you'll open it up, and that's your migration finished.
Like the company that
exactly.
It'll be an update.
So Chrome will ship an update. You won't even see the notes. One day you'll say, hey, your Chrome browser's been updated, you're now post-quantum secure. Blockchains, crypto in general, extremely different. For the first time ever, users hold these key materials. The keys mean a lot more in these systems. They identify more things. There's more reliance on them being maybe fast or small or whatever it might be. So with these unique vulnerabilities, and obviously we'll jump into exactly what those vulnerabilities might be, it just makes blockchains that little bit more of an interesting problem to solve, but also a much harder problem to solve. Not to take away, you mentioned banks. I think outside of blockchains, I'd say banks are one of the most difficult to migrate. A lot of these are still running on Cobalt mainframes and running triple desks, and they haven't even migrated to the latest symmetric key standards.
Yeah,
not going to be easy for them either. So I don't think it's necessarily a walk in the park for everyone. But you take some of these tech companies, Cloudflare, Chrome, Apple, they'll roll out a lot of these things themselves to some extent and hopefully do it properly. But really for blockchains, it's a much more diverse and dynamic environment. And for us at Project 11, that's one of the main reasons that's our core focus.
That's cool. Let's define the company then. Like, you have just kind of identified the space that you're working in, which is like protecting in a way, or providing solutions for blockchains as quantum computers come online. So what is Project 11 doing? Like when you talk about building kind of cryptographic systems, are you building an alternative system? Are you building an upgrade path? Are you lobbying? Are you educating? Are you doing all of those things?
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
I said it earlier and I'll come back to it again, which is future proofing, future building. And I think, so Project 11 is really a company at the convergence of two long running trends. One is quantum computing. Quantum computers, as listeners of your show probably know, and all those guests you referenced earlier, described this like, initially were theorized in the 80s, became much more concrete in the 90s. And then people have been trying to build these things for the past couple of decades. And really in the last year have some very fundamental problems been solved. And now it's kind of a race to scale. And so, at this point, I think it's relatively uncontroversial to say that it's inevitable that quantum computers, they're fault tolerant, will exist. So that's one trend. The other trend is that digital assets, so blockchains, go back 10 years to when I first got into the space. It is night and day different in terms of the adoption.
For sure. And knowledge about,
But you go, 10 years ago, people talked seriously about banning Bitcoin. Now it's a widely held asset and retirement funds. You have banks issuing stablecoins. So the adoption and proliferation of blockchain rails is increasingly defining the foundational layer of finance for all the reasons we've talked about, right? It's like it's cheaper to settle, blah, 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 right? And so, of course, quantum kind of breaks the fundamental security model of blockchains, and blockchains are increasingly becoming the foundation of the world's financial rails. And so, in the sense, I think probably the most ambitious sense, we are building the new standard that will secure blockchain networks and crypto.
Thus, the whole financial system.
It's kind of in a world I see a couple decades from now. That is kind of going to be the financial rails of the world because of all the advantages that blockchains bring to those systems. So, to me, that's the scale of the problem. It's the scale of the opportunity, and that's really what we're trying to future proof and future build for.
And yet, so it's quantum computers. People are aware of them, but there is this sort of sense that the danger was highlighted a few years ago, and then there was a realization that it's many, many years off. And then there was almost a cool down on that fear. I get the sense we got to make it post-quantum. This even in the ZK space, back in 2017, 18, people were talking about post-quantum ZK, but no one really believed that would be an issue. Teams would come out and be are our systems post-quantum secure? And that kind of selling point, which they thought would be relevant, kind of wasn't landing. Now, you're sort of saying okay, so it's come a long way. It's getting closer. It's more real. But is there really a palatable fear? Are people really afraid about this? Because you're right that if crypto becomes the rails of finance, then crypto gets broken by post-quantum, then finance could be broken in a very scary, shocking way. But do you feel the fear is really there? Or is this what you have to kind of show people? Are you the people bringing the fear? Is the question.
I'm using this podcast as an opportunity to spread terror throughout the world. No, it's both. So okay. So one thing I just want to point out that's really interesting. So we have we're pretty close with the quantum computing community. We have an advisor who's a quantum researcher at Caltech, and we talk to a number of these folks because we obviously want to keep the pulse of development. One thing that I've noticed in the course of this company that's been very interesting is there's a total divergence between the cryptographic community and the quantum computing community. The quantum computing community, notably in the past year, has been this is coming sooner than people think. People like John Preskill, who's also at Caltech, these are widely respected experts that are this is actually starting to accelerate and this is happening. On the other side, in the blockchain community specifically, and I'll pick on the Bitcoin community because this is an area where I've seen this the most, is there is it's pretty a widely believed notion that quantum computers will never exist. Can't. So on the one hand, you have quantum physicists being this is happening, and people who rely on the systems that would otherwise be broken by a quantum computer that just deny that it's even possible.
Whoa.
Now, what is the truth? How long is the timeline? Ultimately, these are unknowable questions. The reason, though, that I think it's that the fear, and I wouldn't even use the word fear, the concern is warranted is because, and Conor talked a little bit about some of the other contexts where public key cryptography is used, but if you think about crypto, ownership of a digital asset is entirely defined by the ability to sign a digital signature. That is it. If I can sign a message for your Ethereum wallet, I own your assets.
Yeah.
It breaks this thing that is the most fundamental. So even if you think there's a world where it's only a 1% chance that this might happen in the next few years. You need to take action. And for a variety of reasons, this is not going to be like a switch that blockchains are going to be able to flip, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But I think the fear, though, so I would say like the concern that I see most is from honestly the large institutions and issuers. They see this as a big concern because on the one hand, they see quantum computing and its developments. On the other hand, they see kind of like a bit of a head in the sand from a lot of protocols, not all. And they're kind of like, what in God's name are we going to do if we are ever targeted here? And like, so that's honestly where we see the most concern about this problem.
Interesting. You just kind of talked about why it's difficult or like how it's different. You know, Conor used the example of like a browser could just upgrade. So that's pretty cool. Can a blockchain just upgrade? And I mean, I think Sui has done some work on this. They have some like how to upgrade their network. I think when we had Costas on the show, he talked about that. Like that they've been at least thinking about what it would mean to upgrade their network. But what is Project 11 proposing? Like, are you proposing, here's how to upgrade to people? Or are you proposing, like, here's a scheme to avoid collapse of your system?
To answer the question directly, can these protocols upgrade? The answer is yes. You know, they absolutely can upgrade. Unfortunately, that's not the whole answer. There's a little bit more to it.
What happens when they upgrade?
So let's pick it apart. What does an upgrade look like? So obviously all these protocols are going to be different, so we can, drill down on one or two of them. But you take something take Ethereum, for instance, right? So for them to upgrade, right, so the first thing they need to work out is, let's pick some schemes. Let's go and pick some post-quantum schemes. We can get into this later. These schemes come with massive trade-offs. We got very lucky with elliptic curves. They're pretty small. They're pretty fast. They're pretty easy to do things with. They have very nice operations that allow us to do things quite quickly. Post-quantum doesn't offer us any of those. We usually have a trade-off somewhere. Either the signatures are massive, signing time is really long, verification time is quite long, or it's very complex to implement. So first thing you got to figure out is, okay, which scheme are we going to go for? The next thing you got to do is, how does this scheme fit into our protocol and at all the layers? So take something like Ethereum, the first thing that they need to consider is, how will consensus work? How will proof of stake be impacted by this? Can we still maintain block times? Can we still maintain consensus? Can we do signature aggregation? Can we do all these beautiful things that we need to be able to do to run at these scales? The TLDR on the signature aggregation, it's tricky. These things are pretty hard to do with some of these schemes. They're also very new. We're kind of, for the first time ever in cryptography, which is terrifying for me, the academic papers are going almost straight to production. We're effectively saying, hey, here's a breakthrough. Let's get that into these systems. Let's start testing this. I prefer the days where RSA was kind of in the 70s and, we still get to use it today.
Behind a patent?
Yeah, maybe behind a patent. And that's a slightly different problem.
Issue.
But at least we had this time to let these systems, embed themselves into the world, really test these assumptions. So there is this kind of novelty to these algorithms as well. Then you got to go and figure out, okay, what is the impact on our chains? That's non-trivial. You take something like Solana, where they have to maintain such a high transactions per second. You take something like Bitcoin, where node sizes are already massive. What are you going to do if these signatures are all of a sudden 100x the size? Our node's going to drop off the network because it's too expensive to keep running, and therefore we're going to see some more centralization to miners who can afford that, added data complexity. And then the big question that seems to always get kicked down the road is, what about the users? Every single user is going to have to take some key material that they have somewhere, hopefully buried in their garden or somewhere very safe, dig that up for the first time in possibly years, and migrate that key material to this post-quantum. We can hopefully all agree that the protocols can do this migration, having answered all the questions that I've just posed.
Yeah.
But they now also have to convince every single user, or at least as many users as possible, to do this migration as well. Because it's all well and good if Ethereum support post-quantum. But if none of the users take action or know about it or don't know what to do, well, then we're going to see this exact same problem. It's as vulnerable as it could possibly be because Anna's Ethereum is sitting in a post-quantum or a quantum vulnerable wallet. So this is kind of the dual side of it. There's both the protocols that need to take action, but also every single user for the first time in crypto now have to do some sort of upgrade to post-quantum cryptography.
That user question and the actual action that the user has to take, can we dig into what that is? So say problems have been solved by the network, which we do think some of these will. I think they're already working on it and they should be able to do it. So they have made an upgrade which preserves the signatures, preserves the way that the system works. Now you have to go. I mean, what you're saying is there's no way, is there a way to just automatically upgrade it for all the users? You're shaking your heads. No.
Not your keys, not your crypto.
If I can do that for you, that's I can do whatever I want.
Okay. So each individual user has their keys, what are they actually doing? Like when you talk about them needing to upgrade in this scenario where the network has upgraded, do they just have to sign and they get a new set of keys? Like, is it new keys, or is it like, what's the actual change?
Yeah. So in the most simplistic and naive kind of how this upgrade might look, it would be the latter. It would be a case of you log into your MetaMask or your Ledger wallet, whatever it might be, and you have to move all of those funds to a brand new fresh wallet. Yes, you must take them all from where they are currently and migrate them to a new wallet. And we'll get into what those new wallets might look like and how they might operate. But effectively, you must go in every single asset you own. If you're on Ethereum, you've got 10 NFTs, 20 different ERC20 tokens, a whole load of base coins on Ethereum. All of that must migrate to this new wallet. And this is spooky for some people. I mean, you take someone like an institutional investor like BlackRock, they're going to have to go and open up this wallet that they've been told never touch these keys, never even look for them, never ask about them.
In the depths of Switzerland.
Exactly. And
caverns or something.
Hopefully broken across multiple places in Switzerland and all sorts of these things. They're going to have to go and pull all these together, do this migration event, and then go and break those keys up and put them back into their taverns in Switzerland. And, there's many reasons why this is kind of scary. I mean, straight away, once these migrations happen, it's ripe for more supply chain attacks, people kind of finding, okay, everyone's going to dig up these keys. Is there any sort of interesting things we could do, like side channel attacks, be a fake wallet? We're going to see so many attempts of kind of hijacking this process where all of these key materials need to go back online. They need to be used to migrate and then take those keys offline again. So it isn't just a case of, unfortunately, clicking a button or, in the naive sense at least, or signing a new, message to say, hey, I'm post-quantum. It really is a full lift and shift in the raw sense to a brand new wallet.
Wow.
Yeah. And the lift and shift, the word I would propose for your listeners, just to keep in mind here, is dislocation. It's a universal dislocation of all assets that are currently issued, minus that small handful that are on some post-quantum layer one somewhere. But it's a complete dislocation. And it comes with all the trade-offs that Conor mentioned. But importantly, I want to actually use this to highlight something very important, is that if you wait to do this dislocation till after Q-Day, right? Because I think this is kind of like a lot of people's mindsets. They're like, quantum's not real yet, or maybe it won't be, and so I don't have to worry about it. If you wait till after a quantum computer exists,
Q-Day,
you have to
called
consider,
it. I've never heard that before.
Q-Day, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
good.
Q-Day, yeah.
You guys have been in the quantum world for a while. Okay. Q-Day.
We're pilled, yeah. So if you wait till after that, so now there's a fault-tolerant quantum computer, a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, to use the parlance. Well, now that computer can forge a digital signature. So imagine an upgrade path, right? Where you're like, kind of like Conor described, you're lifting and shifting, you're moving. Like the simplest naive one is like, I'm signing a message to send my funds to a new post-quantum wallet. Well, now a CRQC is here. And so they can send your funds to a post-quantum wallet, right? And so this is what happens so after Q-Day, like I said, going back to the point that I made, is like ECC signatures or digital signatures from ECC cease to have meaning about ownership after Q-Day, which is why this is like, so back to Project 11 and what we're doing, why we're doing it, we're focused heavily on the user migration piece specifically, because we think that is, like many people focus on the protocols, obviously, because like that's kind of where awareness starts. But we think that the biggest problem is going to be dealing with this massive lift and shift.
For sure.
And doing it in advance of. So even whenever you think Q-Day is, whenever you think a quantum computer is coming out, like we ideally as a space are done with this migration, as long as you can imagine that taking at that point. And so that's basically why, so just a quick note on the name, like Project 11, one of the reasons for the 11 is that if you think about it, if you kind of you work yourself backwards in time for when a quantum computer exists to everything that you have to do, protocol migration, user migration, all that stuff, it's already kind of the 11th hour, honestly. And I think that's why we have to start now. To consider these, at the bare minimum, consider these problems, but even more than that, build the tools and solutions that solve them.
Wow.
And I think something interesting to double click on what Alex said there that I always find fascinating is, and it comes back to your first question of, is quantum even coming? Well, unfortunately, the day we wake up to the headline that says, great, Google has a quantum computer, a day that I'm both looking forward to and terrified of, it's too late. if then is the day you decide to do this migration to all of the points Alex just said, you can't. You can't go and release one of these signatures into the mempool because it can be sniped and your funds will be stolen. So it's not so much a case of will it come, I'll wait to see one and then I'll make a decision. It's got to be proactive. You must do it before this day. There's some interesting ways within the academic community of how you might do this post Q day. It's very non-trivial, very expensive, and actually right into the ZK world, which obviously your listeners might be aware of. But to do it the easy way, to kind of do the painless version, it cannot happen after that day. So it's kind of, you can bury your head in the sand and maybe think quantum's not coming, but at least do yourself the favor and do whatever you can to be a little bit proactive is probably the message that we try and give people when we speak to that question of, well, if quantum's not coming or when, we don't know this date, it doesn't really matter because once it's here, it's going to be too late to do this migration phase.
That's crazy, though, that you have to get the users to send funds, because what I'm picturing too, and I think what you guys are building then is that user product. It's the transfer. It's like basically an interface that would like make it easier or make it clear that somebody is transferring their funds to a post-quantum secure version of whatever they are currently in. But is that not an incredible attack space? Like that particular app? Because like I just think of like a little throwback to 2017 when all those ICOs were coming out. One of the best ways to screw it up for people or to steal funds was to, and you'd see this all the time, you'd create a fake website, looked exactly like the other one. People would dump their funds in there and it would just steal it. I mean, you see this also with every phishing attack. It's that point where it's like, click, click. You're supposed to just like do a thing in an app in something that looks a little bit friendlier. You're not looking closely at the contracts you're interfacing with. This is like the ultimate scary UX to me. And that's what you're building.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
No pressure. Yeah, I mean, we actually have, so if people are interested, so maybe it's a good time to call out the product we've already shipped. Yeah. So there's a product called Yellow Pages, yellowpages.xyz. People can check it out. And what that is Yellow Pages specifically is for Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And Bitcoin protocol currently does not support any post-quantum signatures. And so what Yellow Pages basically enables you to do is to generate a new key pair that is post-quantum secure. Technically, you're actually generating two new key pairs, one for each of the two NIST standardized post-quantum algorithms. And then you're cross-signing to basically attesting to owning your Bitcoin address today.
Okay.
So basically, it's like your Bitcoin wallet is signing saying, hey, these are my new post-quantum keys. Your post-quantum keys are cross-signing saying, hey, this is my Bitcoin wallet. And so this is like kind of the first step for like what a user migration could look like. And the nice thing about this is, let's imagine tomorrow a quantum computer comes online. Well, now if like money starts to move around and there's like, kind of a debate on like, okay, well, whose assets are whose, now you at least have an ability to say, hey, I can produce this post-quantum signature.
Yes.
And I tied this post-quantum signature to this address. So now any adversary has to do the same. And so, and then, obviously, like I said, this isn't a deep solution to the problem because Bitcoin hasn't upgraded, but at least you have something that's not totally arbitrary, saying like, oh, I bought this Bitcoin on Coinbase last year. It's definitely mine, something like that. So that's what Yellow Pages solves for. But to your point, I mean, this is extremely sensitive cryptographic interface. And by the way, like, I'm sure Project 11 won't be the single point of all asset migration, right? Wallets are going to have to do this. Like, all existing crypto interfaces are going to have to figure this out. But like, just like with shipping any wallet or any cryptographic protocol, like this is not something you just roll out on a weekend.
Yeah.
This is like, first, you have to develop it. Second, you have to test it. Third, you have to audit it. Fourth, you actually kind of want it to be around for a couple of years to make sure it's not broken. So this is like going back to like the 11th hour thing. Like, this is not a turn on the dime thing. And so, yeah, but that's fundamentally, I think this user interface problem is for us like one of the thing we focus on. Because just to give another example in terms of the time that it's going to take, so Bitcoin, for example, so based on the block size and block time for Bitcoin, you can have basically an understanding of the capacity of the network, TPS. If you want to migrate every Bitcoin UTXO, you need to shut down the entire network for 70 to 74 days. So this is based on some academic work from one of the researchers on our team. So like literally nothing on Bitcoin happens except moving UTXOs from pre to post quantum. That's a 74-day process, best case scenario. So obviously, you're not going to get the best case scenario. You'd probably be lucky to get 10% of that, which means you're talking about 750 days. So that's, even if you have all the interfaces and everything all built out, you're talking about like 2 years, basically, to actually facilitate the migration.
Whoa. You just mentioned some work. Is that public? Can we see that? The 74 days.
Yeah, we can give you the link. Yeah, that was one of our, a person on our team, Joseph Kearney. Actually his PhD was in post-quantum blockchains and has done all this work and simulated it. So yeah, we'll share that.
Cool. So, I mean, with that scenario, it just sounds like, well, we're headed towards a cliff and we're screwed. But I feel like there's got to be solutions that you're thinking about there. Like, which networks, the ones that you've mentioned so far is like Bitcoin, Solana, Ethereum, but is Project 11 focused on Bitcoin? Because like the product you just described is like a Bitcoin product. Are you focused on a little bit of a broader kind of blockchain? Doesn't it get complicated when you go to different, because each one's different?
Yeah, so Yellow Pages was oriented to Bitcoin, as I mentioned. So it was kind of it was a Bitcoin product effectively. So what is our focus? I mean, our focus is really at the public key cryptography layer. And you mentioned like there's complexity across those thousands of chains. But again, because this is so foundational, there's really only a handful of public key crypto schemes that anyone builds on.
Okay.
And there's only like 2 that have been standardized by NIST. So you kind of have there's 3 or 4 elliptic curve schemes, EDDSA, CDSA, BLS, that everyone uses for the signatures. And then everyone's going to go to these 2, SLHDSA, MLDSA, or maybe one of the variants. So it actually, because it's that level, it's actually pretty simple. Like, for example, to make it concrete, Bitcoin and Ethereum use the same elliptic curves. So really, your Bitcoin address and your Ethereum address are just points on this elliptic curve. The fact that one is Bitcoin and one is Ethereum is just like a bunch of conventions that we apply to those elliptic curve points to call them one versus the other. But mathematically speaking, they're the exact same thing, right? And so there's this universality to it, and again, this is directly tied to just how fundamental these things are to blockchains. But for us, what we realize is if you solve this problem for one,
you will catch a few.
Well, again, these are not wildly different schemes. Everyone's basically using ECC, and everyone has to go to these handfuls. So it's it kind of looks, it's pretty similar. Now, of course, in the implementation, there's absolutely complexity because all these things, there's different encodings and blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to underwrite that, but it's certainly a universal problem. And the solution, because it's so fundamental, will also be somewhat interchangeable between networks.
Let's talk about the SWE work, because they came out with a paper recently, actually, I think. And I think Kostas had mentioned it on the show as well, which was this work on migrating specifically the SWE network. And you're familiar with this, I'm assuming. They're talking about migrating the SWE network to a post-quantum secure cryptographic scheme, something different. What is it? And would that be applicable to other networks as well that we know?
Yeah, so I guess something we probably should have mentioned first is, what is the quantum threat? Because this will be helpful as we dive into how different networks are approaching it. So really, when we talk about the quantum threat, there's 2 algorithms that always come up. There's Shor's algorithm and there's Grover's. And you mentioned, this was probably mentioned before on some of those previous episodes, but there's largely 2 algorithms. Shor's algorithm is the one that reverses a public key back to its private key, right? That's the scary one. That's the one that, me knowing Anna's address from her Bitcoin wallet, I can then go and get her private key and then I steal your funds. Grover's algorithm is a little bit different. Grover's algorithm is more impactful on symmetric key cryptography and hashes. So the ability to reverse a hash function or to find an AES key or whatever it might be. The immediate impact from quantum is Shor's. Shor's is what's going to arrive sooner. It's got kind of somewhat easier, I'll say that quote unquote, because I'm sure quantum physicists will hate me saying this, but it's got a much easier runtime within the quantum algorithm space. It's going to be the one that arrives in the next 3 to 8 years based on the latest kind of evidence. Grover's is 10, 20, 30, even maybe 50 years away. So that helps us also then decide, okay, well, what do we need to care about right now? Where are the weaknesses in the system?
Although, would you want to wait? If you don't fix all of them, don't you end up just having to do these migrations every 5 years?
And one thing we've learned from the last year of Project 11 is these protocols don't like migrations. So let's do one and let's not have to worry about it. But absolutely, to your point.
But I get it. There's some part of it that's more pressing and needs to be solved earlier.
Exactly that. And that nuance is helpful because, and this will help motivate the work who you're doing. So hash functions are considered safe. They're not quantum vulnerable right now. So really then within these systems, and Alex kind of touched on this, that all these protocols, can be the same. I mean, Alex is going to start the war now to say that Bitcoin and Ethereum is all the same thing because of the same points on the curve, but largely
spicy takes. I'm here for the spicy takes.
Absolutely. But it's largely true. So, there's going to be hash functions in there. There's going to be some public key cryptography operations in there. Knowing where the kind of weakest point is, being public key cryptography, then we can kind of really zone in on that one part of the protocol and say, this is what we need to fix. So one interesting aspect that some of the EDDSA chains are doing, like Sui, what they're doing is they're saying, well, because hash functions are safe, how the kind of private key generation works is you usually have these 12 or 24 words that you write down very securely. You keep them really safe. They're put through a hash function in order to create your private key. Okay. And that private key then goes on to generate your public key. Well, with Shor's algorithm, knowing your public key, I can get back to your private key. But very importantly, I can't go back from your private key back to those words. Those words are out of reach for me with just Shor's algorithm. I would need a quantum computer capable of running Grover's algorithm, which is
further off.
20, 30, 40 years ago.
Okay, so the secret key, so the keywords, or what do they call it? The seed phrase, yeah. The seed phrase. So the seed phrase is like safer than the private key in this context.
From an attack from a quantum computer, absolutely.
Which seems very counterintuitive because the seed phrase looks so silly, but yes.
Yeah, it looks silly. It looks like I could guess those words. I've tried it too many times in my life to assume I could guess those words. It doesn't work. It turns out it is very difficult. But yeah, those words are more safe because they're fed through this one-way hash function to get that private key material. So now the kind of idea is, well, what we could do is we could just not use any of these new post-quantum algorithms instead, and I'm going to venture into ZK world where you and Alex have plenty more knowledge on this space than me. But if I can have some sort of zero knowledge proof that I know those words, that will eventually lead to my address after I put them through the various stages that are required to get to that address, well, then we can still maintain the same system because all the system relies on is some knowledge of a secret. That secret is currently that private key, what is spit out from the hash function, but there's no reason that secret can't just be one step further back, which is that seed phrase. And that's some of the work that they're doing is, and it kind of only works for the EDDSA protocols. Just by the way they derive that path is very well defined. It's very well specced out. Unfortunately, in Ethereum and Bitcoin, we didn't have that at the beginning. So it's a little bit diverse. Different wallets do it differently. Ledger might do it different from MetaMask, from Phantom, from the Bitcoin CLI, which a lot of people still use. So we don't have the luxury of it being a very well-defined path. But in these newer chains that rely on EDDSA, we do. We have this very well structured. So this idea of, well, we don't need any public key cryptography. We can just go all in on zero knowledge. Now, and I'll let Alex maybe speak to it more, it's definitely not trivial to do this. There's a lot of hash functions involved. It's a huge amount of operations within that ZK. But ultimately, that's one of the kind of ideas of ignoring all of the post-quantum algorithms and saying, well, we could just go straight and all in on this ZK space.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that's a technique that helps to solve the problem that we at Project 11 may very well apply in context for these networks, right? So this is the difference between theory and practice, right? So this theoretically works for this subset of chains. Practically speaking, you still have to build the thing. So cost, it's great, costs a sort of paper, but Anna, if you want to do this today, there's not a way because no one's built a thing to implement the paper, right? So, and obviously there's, we don't need to retread the number of protocols where it's it seems easy, it is hard, ZK.
5 years later.
8 years later.
8 years later,
Yeah, and actually maybe it's worth just spending a couple minutes talking about the impact to zero knowledge cryptography specifically.
Oh, okay.
Because actually there is a family of ZK algorithms that a lot of people are talking about as potentially a solution, not only, that will kind of exist in the post-quantum world, but also might be able to be used for authorization. Right. And those are Starks, right? So Starks, I'm sure.
Hash-based.
The hash-based, yes, exactly. The popularly known as Starks, this, hash-based snarks, whatever, right? So anything based on codes or hashes like that is secure in the post-quantum world. And specifically, what do we mean by secure here is soundness, right? So are you able to create a false proof? Yes or no? And then zero knowledge. Is it private? Yes or no? Now, obviously, as we know in most of these ZK systems that are deployed today, privacy is the less used aspect. Most of them, it's about compression, and then it's about just the soundness to ensure that proof is valid, right? So that's all the ZK rollups, they rely on this, right? So Starks, because they rely on hash functions, they will be secure into the future. And so that's one of the reasons why if you look at the Ethereum roadmap, and Ethereum, to their great credit, has been very on top of this post-quantum, promoting awareness of it and then starting to think about how they're going to do that. Starks are one of the things they're thinking about because of their post-quantum security, right? For, rolling up or batching transactions or for aggregating signatures, et cetera. Now, take Groth 16 style snarks, what breaks. Well,
Which are
potentially
elliptic curve based, yeah.
Exactly. They're based on elliptic curves. And that's one of the reasons why, by the way, like Conor mentioned, we don't need to get into all the weeds, but like Conor mentioned, ECC has like nice properties. That's one of the reasons why Groth16 snarks are constant in size and constant in verification time. It's directly related to the nice properties of elliptic curves. So, okay, so because elliptic curves are broken here, what happens here? Well, you can potentially produce a false proof if you have a quantum computer, and depending on how the proof systems are implemented, you might be able to actually break the privacy retroactively. So for like Zcash transactions, you might be able to see after the fact.
Wow. Into the shielded pool.
Right? Now, that's not universal. Like that aspect of like, and this is like in the post-quantum broader cryptographic parlance, this is called harvest now, decrypt later.
Wow, it's just like get the data because eventually you'll be able to look at it.
Right. And so this is, by the way, like what I just described, like that's why governments around the world today largely are like pushing their encrypted system. They're pushing for post-quantum cryptography for this exact reason. Because you can imagine like the Central Intelligence Agency, like, hey, if we're not, like if someone can harvest now, decrypt later all of our communications, that would be bad, even if it's a while from now. So, but those are the two aspects of soundness and zero knowledge. And so soundness for all the EC-based snarks breaks straight away. So that basically post Q day, in the same way you won't be able to trust like a pre-quantum Bitcoin or Ethereum transaction, you won't be able to trust a proof from an EC-based proof system. Now, obviously, that's maybe the most extreme version of that statement, but bottom line is they will basically be obsolete once a quantum computer exists.
I mean, we have on the show just recently talked about the quantum security of hash-based snarks, and it's funny you're saying Starks, like to me they're the same thing now. Snarks and Starks are kind of merged because there's so many like hash-based snarks. But anyway, or they add like a Fry-based recursion, so a hash-based recursion somewhere in the flow. But yeah, we were talking about hash-based. We've been talking a lot about lattices too, also post-quantum, also very early. Like I don't know if they're, and I think it's not clear yet if they're the winner. I think hash-based hashes are just like better understood in a way. Well, actually, no, lattices have been around for a long time. I shouldn't say that. But anyway, the lattice-based snarks are new.
Yeah. I mean, ZK-friendly hash functions like Poseidon
are also new.
They are new. So this is like lattices have been around for like 25 years-ish. And people are like, that's kind of like new. But then we also have Poseidon. I mean, this gets back to Conor's earlier point. Like this is actually maybe like a really exciting thing about the field of cryptography is like, I feel like in some ways it was kind of boring.
Seems like it, eh? Until
spicy takes. If Dan Bonet listens to this podcast, I'm sure he'll really have a word with me. He'll have a take on my take. But anyway, no, but like especially now that all of these systems are basically going to become obsolete, like there is this kind of, you can't take for granted anything anymore as secure. And so therefore there's a lot more reason to explore what otherwise you would never explore. And so I think that's, I guess, when I mean boring, I mean like it's not boring, but this is a really exciting era because there's a lot more opportunity to do things like lattices. I mean, honestly, without the quantum as a motivation, lattices would have kind of just been a curiosity.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of that's I think an aspect of this that I see as an opportunity.
That's interesting. I mean, but so what you're, just to sort of recap, you were just sharing sort of this is like quantum threat to ZK. So quantum threat to ZK is primarily the ECC elliptic curve cryptography based snark type things that harken back more to the 2016 sort of 2015, like when the like all those zero cache papers, all those initial protocols came out. So that's ZK specific.
Yes.
But going back to the sort of SWI solution, I guess they're using like a hash-based ZK system to prove something about a blockchain seed phrase. Is that correct? Just to clarify, Conor, what you had shared there?
So as far as I'm aware, I read the paper a while ago. It didn't actually specify how the ZK would work internally. The assumption would be it would be post-quantum.
I mean, I think it makes...
I would
hope. It'd be weird if it isn't.
I would hope. But I believe, like, I didn't see in the paper itself, it's great. It's really a great paper, but it didn't specify necessarily how the internal would work. But yeah, the assumption there would be some sort of hash-based snark. And it would have to be if it's as you say, if it's going to be doing the post-quantum piece. I mean, so ultimately, that's exactly right. So it's effectively, well, we can use this proof of knowledge of these words the same way we could use proof of knowledge of a private key, which unfortunately now is quantum vulnerable. So For me, it's a little bit of kind of replacing some complexity tax with a different complexity tax. I mean, pick your poison. You can go PQ lattices or you can go the ZK over a seed phrase. I personally have an opinion, and I know I'm on a ZK podcast, but I'd probably go and do something a bit more conservative around, post quantum, even if it's a post quantum hash based scheme or a lattice scheme. I think it's a little bit easier. We have them; they're standardized at the NIST level. They've got a bit of attention now at this point. A lot of people are trying to break them, not just within blockchains. They've had a good few years now, not quite long enough, but I think the ZK piece to solve it, I see it as a really nice fallback. Where let's imagine you did an upgrade on time. Well, now the only way to prove knowledge of your private key would be some sort of proof of your words. I would much rather, though, that's kind of the fallback after Q day. Before Q day, let's get as many people to use these signatures with these private keys that they can still reveal safely. And let's migrate to more of a standardized protocol than everyone. I can't imagine every single wallet trying to do their own ZK proof over a seed. It's not exactly an easy solution either.
ZK is getting faster, though. But yeah.
It is.
So just to continue on the Sui story, though, so you sort of said like the solution that they had presented would potentially help some blockchains, but not all. So what is the groupings of like, I'm sure you've probably scanned this, like Ethereum and Bitcoin are similar. Does it almost have to do with like the generation when it came out? Like all the blockchains that came out in 2021 are usually like using some particular... And what are they using exactly? Is it an algorithm? Is it a consensus thing? Like, where's the point of failure?
It's pretty much spot on. It's the newer generations of these chains tended to use EDDSA. And there was multiple reasons why.
And what is EDDSA? Like, what part of the stack is that?
It's effectively a different signature type. It's still elliptic curve based, so it's still quantum vulnerable.
Okay.
It's a different curve type than what Bitcoin and Ethereum use, which is ECDSA. So it can use a different curve. And funny enough, Bitcoin actually didn't use a different curve. They kept their old curve and they kind of retrofitted EDDSA Schnorr signatures onto this. But effectively, it's a whole new elliptic curve. It has really nice properties. And I believe the reason it wasn't actually rolled out during Bitcoin and Ethereum's time, it was under patent at the time. So it couldn't even have been used if they wanted to.
Okay.
Bitcoin actually rolled it out when they they released the Taproot protocol. And they actually started supporting a little bit more of these Schnorr signatures. Ethereum, something similar. And then a lot of the newer generation chains, they went directly for these. The main benefit you get is you can do signature aggregation quite easily with the EDDSA schemes, which you can't quite do as easily with the ECDSA scheme. So really the breakpoint is those newer generation chains tended to go with that route.
So it's on the signature front. It's the signatures themselves. It's not the consensus.
No.
Okay.
Very much so on the signature. You could use those signatures as part of your consensus protocol, but it's the root signature, how you're signing, what the operation is you're doing when you're proving knowledge of your private key.
Sort of side question here, but like, do quantum computers also break consensus? Like the puzzle of the Bitcoin, like the proof of work, like the thing that you're running? I think actually, I think we talked about that in that Orsa Tath show where it was like, all of a sudden, like someone's getting all the blocks or something.
I'll give my take on this. So in theory, yes. In practice, no. I think so. Grover's algorithm is what you need to basically find the pre-image.
So it's the later one. Okay.
It's the later one. And it's worth noting that like resource estimates that you could find a lot of these academic papers. We can link you a few in the show notes. But like the quantum computer that you would need to build to run this in like a realistic time frame for a Bitcoin block with the amount of hash power is like astronomical in size.
Okay.
So it's like, yeah, sure, it could happen.
Okay.
But practically speaking, like compared to, like just to make this concrete, in terms of just number of qubits, which is one of the many dimensions of a quantum computer, but let's just take that. Like a quantum computer to run Grover's algorithm to break Bitcoin consensus would have to be like billions and billions of qubits in size.
And how big are we at now?
Well, so the largest quantum computer in terms of number of qubits is 6,000.
Okay.
Right, so that
so we're a little ways off.
Is 6,000 qubits.
Okay,
yeah, and it's not to say it's not going fast. Like the state of the art was 1,000 at the beginning of the year, now it's 6,000. So it's 6x to just 10 months basically. And so, but that said, like, and Shor's algorithm, like the resource estimate the latest estimate. And by the way, this constantly is going down as algorithmic tricks are discovered. Is 1 million qubits. So it's like. The difference between breaking Bitcoin consensus is like billions and billions.
Yeah.
And then the public key stuff is like 1 million. And we're at 6,000. So it's like,
You're getting into like almost like a little over 100x and you're getting close. No, but a little over 100x what we have now and you're getting close to Shor's.
Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is that like Shor's algorithm is really special It's special for a very specific reason. It's the only problem, like the discrete log problem, which is the basis for ECC of all of public key cryptography. It's the only problem that we know a quantum computer can do much, much faster than a classical counterpart. It's proven. There is no other problem that a quantum computer is provably able to do better than a classical computer. In fact, Grover's only gives you a polynomial speed up. So it's like not very fast. So this is why like a lot of like the proposed changes to like Bitcoin, for example, be like, oh, well, just make it SHA-512 instead of SHA-256. And then you're totally fine because it's like, the degree of improvement that you're getting is so narrow. Whereas with Shor's, it's an exponential speed up. So that means even if you I know we're not talking about RSA, but let's just take RSA for a second here, where it's like RSA 2048. Even if you double the number of bits, that doesn't buy you hardly anything because Shor's get so much better, so much faster. And now linking this back now to the quantum computing industry, this is another reason why this is a really interesting time. You have a quantum computing industry, which in the last 3 months alone has seen about $5 billion of capital going into it.
Whoa. Not quite AI money.
Not quite AI money, but if you just look at basically, if you just look at the chart from money going into this, people view this as kind of the next hot new tech thing.
Cool.
But you look at the potential uses for a quantum computer other than cryptanalysis, and just like I described with Grover's, it's kind of you got to squint pretty hard to see something in the near term. But you have, for example, Satoshi's Bitcoin sitting there that with a relatively small quantum computer, you could potentially get, and that would maybe earn you some money. And by the way, this isn't a theoretical thing. Like people have talked about this. Again, you don't even have to be in the rooms where these conversations happen. You can just look at Shor's algorithm is relatively easy. It's going to be the first bar we peer. And the money you make from Shor's algorithm is
good
on blockchains. It's just blockchain. It's like the digital asset. So it's like those two things are going to intersect.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe, and if it's okay, and I'd like to use the opportunity in the last couple minutes here. I want to because people may have listened to this podcast at this point. They're like, this is all scary. I'm terrified. But okay, Alex and Conor, Project 11, what are you guys actually doing? What is the solution here?
So you were talking about the EDDSA. I wanted to ask what you're changing it to. I don't think you've actually talked about this. And how do you even decide that? So yes, tell me what you're doing, but include that somewhere in your answer.
So what are we doing, right? Okay, very high level, we need to build new foundations for all blockchains. What does that mean? We need to implement, first and foremost, these post-quantum algorithms. So I'm going to start at the deepest layer and then work our way up to kind of the product to describe this. So first we need to implement these algorithms. This is something that we're doing. We're taking the NIST standardized algorithms, but we're customizing them specifically for the blockchain use case. And this was actually, we recently released some work called Suite B that we did in concert with Zuko and JP Amelson, both cryptographers, authors of the Blake hash function. And what that is basically it uses Blake in the internals of some of these NIST standardized algorithms, namely MLDSA. Now, why do that? Because signing and verifying become a little bit faster. And so that means the trade-offs that you have to make in the protocol at the protocol level become less painful, right? Your TPS doesn't have to go down quite as much. Your cost for proving for ZK isn't quite as high, right? So that's making these marginal improvements at the basic level scheme is something that we're very passionate about because this ultimately will be the foundation of everything that comes on top. Now, on top of this, what do we need to do? Like I said, broadly speaking, we're focused on the migration of user assets. The first thing we need to do is we need to decouple the security of assets from the protocol migration timelines. Because you can, as you mentioned a second ago or earlier on the show, there's a huge window of vulnerability here if people do this migration wrong. And protocols could potentially break themselves by trying to rush this. So you basically need to give protocols the time to do this safely, but that doesn't mean you can just user assets be stolen potentially. So you need to basically create a way to secure assets today. So that's really the first thing we're building. The first product is something that has an ability for you to it's a vault. It'll be a wallet on Ethereum implemented using account abstraction that basically lets you, for any EVM based asset, directly secure it with post-quantum cryptography today. And that, like I said, relies on account abstraction. Account abstraction means you can implement this post-quantum signatures at the smart contract layer and use that as the authorization rather than just like an ECDSA signature. So that will work for any EVM issued asset, and it will work for anything that you can bridge over to that chain. So Bitcoin, for example, it would work for WBTC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'd still be exposed to a risk if the bridge, for example, that you like relied upon wasn't doing all the right things to ensure that it was post-quantum secure. But theoretically, that is a solvable problem, right? So what we're building is the first and only vault to secure your existing assets today. That's thing one. Thing two is now we need to build a map. So we need to take the idea of Yellow Pages, map old to new. Now we need to globalize that across the entire space. Old to new. Bitcoin address, old to new. Ethereum address, old to new. SUI address, old to new.
But are you still moving funds in this scenario? Like, do you still have to send funds to the new address in every single case?
Every case you have to do this. But one thing, like one of the reasons why this map is important, smart contracts. Smart contracts consist of two things, logic and state. The logic is like, let's just take USDC. It's like, okay, hey, like we have an admin key and we can mint money and like, we can freeze things, but otherwise just an ERC20 token. And that's the state. The state is like Anna's ETH address, balance. What happens to them? Smart contracts have to redeploy. So you have to undeploy and then redeploy. But then you've like secured your logic with some post-quantum authorization stuff, but then you're left with a problem where you're like, well, I have Anna's state, but her address is like classical. And even if you've generated a new key pair and you've moved your assets, it's not like Circle has like your email address. They can't like, hey, tell us your new address. They need a global reference to be able to know, hey, where, it's like a phone book. This is why we actually picked the Yellow Pages as name. They need to look up your old address and they need to know where to route your new, give you the post-quantum version of USDC. So that's what this mapping layer does. As a cool side effect to this, what this enables us to do is create something very similar to the DNS for the internet. Like when I go to google.com, I don't have to memorize google.com's IP address. That's the whole point of the DNS or the domain name system, right? And so this actually kind of by accident, this necessity to migrate assets to post-quantum creates the opportunity to make a better UX. Let me give a very concrete example. Like this namespace that I'm describing can have a human readable name, kind of like ENS, but global. And then underneath that human readable name, there's like a hierarchy of different keys.
Yeah.
Pre-quantum, post-quantum for Bitcoin, for ETH, for SUI. You can actually decide for yourself, customize per network when you want to actually go over to post-quantum. In addition, if I'm sending you money, you can imagine a world where I just have to send it to your human readable name. Or you can even go beyond just crypto. Think about how cryptography is used on the web. Like a DKIM certificate for your email address includes a public key. And you can, and there's a way, and like that can basically also be included in this potential, post-quantum DNS scheme. And now I can just send you USDC to your email. And by the way, I don't have to care or worry about whether you have your USDC on Solana, on Ethereum, anywhere. Like it routes automatically.
Wow, that becomes like a totally different like now it's like, oh, this is like opening up.
Well, it's the reason these two things are connected is going back to that word dislocation. Everything has to move anyway. So if everyone's got to get up out of their chairs, you might as well use the opportunity to make this UX like it should have been in the first place, but no one built it like all these chains sprung up individually. No one built that intentionally, but now there's an opportunity to do this in a different way and solve the post-quantum problem or the quantum vulnerability at the same time. So those are the things that we're doing. We're building the fundamental new protocols that hopefully will become the standard for all future blockchains and financial rails. We're building the custody solution to decouple protocol migration timeline from asset security. And we're building this global namespace, which basically enables everyone to map pre-quantum to post-quantum and gives you a big UX benefit as a side effect.
Are you also building across all those chains? Or is that some sort of future vision that eventually this DNS could be used that way? Or are you still focused on a per network kind of product?
So the DNS is meant to be global. Like I said, it's just a mapping. So I think the way we're thinking to implement initially is just as an Ethereum smart contract. But really, it could live anywhere. And by the way, it could be its own chain. Like, if you remember Handshake was like kind of this, honestly. It didn't have the post-quantum aspect, but Handshake was a layer 1 blockchain that just served as a mapping, right? So I think, at the end of the day, we're more interested in solving the problems than theoretically creating the most elegant solution. I mean, ideally we do both, but I think simple first. And so that's why we're going to start, because it's only a mapping, it can live really on any smart contract platform. Probably Ethereum is the easiest one to start with. And then we got to go from there.
Wow. the way to migrate the signatures, the something, and then the DNS level.
Yeah.
Can you just list those 3 levels again?
Yeah.
The 3 layers?
So it's the signatures, the cryptographic protocol for digital signatures themselves. It's the custody layer that makes sure that the protocols can be on their own timelines, but your asset can be safe.
The custody layer. This is the vaults.
Yes, exactly. That's right. It's the vault that secures the asset itself. And then there's the global namespace that maps basically pre to post quantum and then gives you this nicer UX of like, I don't have to think about your ETH address. I can just send it to your name. Wow. Basically.
Sounds very ambitious and exciting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
You know me. This is what I wake up and love doing every day.
So just one small thing. Is there any sort of Fallout references happening in any of what you're doing? Because Project 11, the vaults, I don't know, for some reason I'm getting very like Fallout-y vibes. But anyway.
That's a cool brand idea because I think
we have a rebrand. That's a rebrand coming now. Yeah,
exactly.
Great. There wasn't, but now there definitely is.
Nice.
Yeah. Does all the vaults in Fallout have like a number too?
They do,
they?
exactly.
Like,
that's why that's sort of striking me as,
Yeah.
And 11th hour, and it's kind of like a similar like, stress.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for revisiting this problem space kind of for our audience. I feel like the threat of quantum computers kind of comes and goes in people's minds, but I think it's good to keep it top of mind here, especially as we're seeing this acceleration of adoption. Like you said, when it was just a niche thing, it could be theoretical, but when people are actually using it, it becomes quite scary for it to come undone. At the same time, it's nice to hear the sort of the solutions that you're thinking of. Do you know if there's anyone else in your competitive space? Like, are there other teams that are looking at that?
I mean, I think what makes us unique is that a lot of folks tend to start from the protocol level. And they're like, we're going to build the new quantum secure Bitcoin, or we're going to build a new quantum secure layer 1. And it's everyone just come here. And look, I think that is a viable approach. But our view is that people would rather secure their existing assets, not move them to some new chain. Now, I mean, this dislocation is real. And so, look, there's a possibility that that could start from the protocol first could be a right approach. And I imagine a lot of those chains will see upticks, but that's not our focus directly. But that most of the other folks working on post-quantum tend to be of that flavor.
Got it. They're like releasing new chains, basically. Well, thank you both for coming on. Conor, great to get to know you and to hear about sort of your research and your thinking around this. Alex, always a pleasure to have you on. Very exciting to hear about the new direction and Project 11. Yeah, thanks to both of you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much.
And I want to say thank you to the podcast team, Henrik, Rachel, Tanya, and Hector. And to our listeners, thanks for listening.